19 national championships, 1,972 wins all time, 202 consensus All-Americans, 14 Heisman Trophy winners, 1,021 NFL draft picks, including 162 first-rounders, and 203 combined weeks spent at number one in the AP poll. Ohio State versus Notre Dame for the national championship. However, the Irish have lost 6 straight to the Buckeyes and hasn't beaten them since 1936. And most notably, they haven't won a national championship since 1988. And the Ohio State, for as dominant as they have been, have only 2 national championships in the last 54 years. This is Always Talking Ball. Tyler Noe, Lance Barton. If you're tuning in for the first time, thank you. We are a college football podcast that started 17 months ago, and we're growing a huge and loyal following, and we appreciate each and every one of you. Lance, how pumped are you for this game?
I mean, when you design a 12-team playoff, man, when this was designed, you pretty much dream of being able to have brands like this and programs like this that are in the national championship game. I mean, Notre Dame and Ohio State, 2 blue bloods of college football, 2 of the best programs overall in the history of the sport, 2 of the best programs of the last decade. I mean, these 2 programs have passed the test of time. Absolutely. And so, yeah, dude, I am fired up for this game. It doesn't matter what part of the country you are from. If you are a fan of this sport, of college football, you should be excited to see these 2 brands and these 2 just absolutely, we got to throw this in here, gorgeous uniform matchup with the Irish and the Buckeyes. So, yeah, man, I'm excited to watch it.
Yeah, man, I am pumped. Full disclosure to everyone watching. I know we got a ton of new people checking out our videos and show every single day. I'm a lifelong Notre Dame fan. I desperately want them to win this game. I'll be cheering my butt off for them on Monday night, but stay tuned in here because I may surprise you with some things. I may show you just how professional and unbiased we can be here on ATB.
I am also going to vouch for you on this, in that I normally gas Notre Dame up more than you do on this pod. I don't know if it's because of just being a fan, a little bit of pessimistic, or whatever it may be. But yeah, I'll vouch for you, man. You don't throw a bunch of biased takes on here in regards to Notre Dame or anything like that. So again, we love the sport of college football as a whole first, and we're going to try to give you the best coverage we possibly can here to get you ready for this natty.
Yeah. Notre Dame was written off after week 2 to that loss to Northern Illinois.
Absolutely.
And they've been in playoff mode ever since. What would a win in this national championship do for this Notre Dame program?
Well, Marcus Freeman in general has already made this program, and we talked about it on the last episode, and your talking heads around the country talked about how the Marcus Freeman has really just made Notre Dame more likable in general. Because they're one of the most hated teams outside of the Notre Dame fan base around the country, and have been for a long time. They have one of the biggest followings. But, dude, this would be – I mean, I can't imagine a national champion – trying to think of a national championship game. The TCU-Georgia game, obviously after the game, it seemed like TCU that was an insurmountable. That would have been a David versus Goliath type deal. This is not David versus Goliath. It's Notre Dame and Ohio State, for goodness sake. But because of the point spread, because of the injuries that Notre Dame has had, because of how Ohio State has seemed like just an absolute wagon in this college football playoff run, if Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame were to pull this off, it really would be one of the greatest national championship runs we've ever seen in regards to them. And it would be just a huge catapult for their program in regards to recruiting, how they recruit, the culture of their program, because this Notre Dame team's built on culture. That's my opinion. One of the main reasons they are winning games right now is the culture that Marcus Freeman has built. And it's next man up with all the injuries that they've had. They don't seem to have some major drop off when somebody goes out. So this would establish Notre Dame, give them that, obviously that national championship they had since the 80s. But I just think that it would be a huge catapult for their program as far as they already recruit nationally. But they're going to be able to get even better players from a recruiting standpoint and the transfer portal standpoint. going and winning a national championship and being put on the top of college football. That's what I think it means for Notre Dame.
How is this different than the last time that they were in the national championship all the way back in 2012 against your Alabama Crimson Tide?
Well, I think the biggest difference is Brian Kelly talked about it after that game against Alabama in 2012 that they weren't ready for that type of line of scrimmage play. Like, they got bullied on the line of scrimmage, especially by the Alabama offensive line. That is the biggest difference. Dude, that offensive line for Alabama in 2012, you can ask every Alabama fan and whoever covers the SEC that knew that 2012 team from Alabama really well. Dude, all 5 of the offensive linemen that were on that Alabama team went and played in the NFL, and multiple All-Americans along that offensive line, multiple first-round picks along that offensive line. And this is no slight to the Buckeye offensive line, but I think Ohio State fans would even tell you this new makeshift offensive line that Ohio State has, since the injuries that they've had throughout this season, losing a first-round tackle and losing other multiple players, losing the Remington Award winner at the center position. This offensive line is not even remotely comparable to that Alabama offensive line from 2012, the one that's going to be on the field this week. Again, not saying this offensive line's bad for Ohio State. I'm just saying that the 5 people that are along this offensive front for the Buckeyes are not going to be future NFL like stars, and they're not just absolute studs right now at this point. That's to me that to me is the biggest difference in this game. And Notre Dame is way more well equipped along both lines of scrimmage, even with injuries. Yeah. Like, this team is built at the line of scrimmage for Notre Dame.
Yeah, even with all the injuries, they've been able to withstand the test in the playoffs against Georgia.
Georgia and Penn State. Georgia and Penn State are 2 teams that obviously are very good along the line of scrimmage. And even like you said, even with the injuries, Notre Dame didn't have any problems with that. So I just think, to answer your question, as far as the 2012 group, I just think Notre Dame's built better along both lines of scrimmage, and I don't think that Ohio State's offensive line is as dominant as that 2012 Alabama offensive line.
Yeah. On the other side, similarly, Ohio State, a lot of people wrote them off after they lost to Michigan for what was the 4th time in a row. A lot of fans upset, a lot of people kind of, doubting that team all of a sudden. What would a win do for Ohio State, and most notably, what would a national championship do for Ryan Day?
You just hit the nail on the head. That was going to be my answer. As far as Ohio State as a program, like you just said, they've only won like 2 national championships in the last 50-something years, I think is what you said. But they are the most consistent program in all of college football. Like, it doesn't matter who their coach is, what era you want to go in. Like, since I've been alive, and even before I was alive, like, Ohio State in every era of college football has been a really, really good at the top tier of college football. It's just next man up as far as coach, and that's just how they've been. So as far as Ohio State as a program, I don't know how you feel, but I don't know that anybody would necessarily view the program any differently. They're still going to view them as one of the most elite programs in all of the sport if they win, or even if they don't win. But Ryan Day, oh, dude, like, this would be, I can't think of this would be a bigger deal to Ryan Day than Marcus Freeman as far as the public perception of each coach. Already everybody thinks Marcus Freeman's a freaking stud. And most people, I think, believe that Ryan Day is a really good football coach. It's just he couldn't get that Michigan monkey off his back, and people just obviously hold that rivalry and that ordeal against him. But outside of Michigan, the dude has pretty much cleaned house in his career. But obviously, he's gotten to the playoffs multiple times with the Buckeyes, and he's come up short for winning a national championship. So this would catapult Ryan Day into a completely different status. I think people would look at him in a completely different way. He is still a very young guy and a very young head coach. So he gets a natty now. What's to say that he couldn't go on a run and, like, we look up 6 or 7 years from now and we start talking to Ryan Day in the same breath as some of these other coaches that have 2 or 3 plus national championships? Because Ohio State, they're not going anywhere as a program. So this would be beyond of a huge deal for Ryan Day. And obviously Buckeye fans, they're not going to forgive him for the Michigan loss, but this would help ease that pain a lot. Yeah, I would imagine.
All right, let's talk about the game, man. If you're a Notre Dame fan, especially if you're an Ohio State fan, if you're watching on YouTube right now, bring on the comments. Let us know in the comments what you think. Click that subscribe button right now on YouTube. Scan that QR code right up there. Awesome home field apparel, 15% off. They'll probably have some national championship apparel for whoever team wins. If you're listening on Apple and Spotify, click and follow, click subscribe to the show, share it with a friend, get them ready for the big game.
And we're on Instagram, we're on TikTok. Like I said, we're on X. Follow us on there. We put out a lot of reels and different highlight deals on Instagram and TikTok that I think you guys will enjoy. Some good content there. And of course, on X, we're always got those fingers working on the phones, hitting up different news, different things on X. So yeah, just hit us up on there and give us a follow.
Yeah. Ohio State versus Notre Dame. Notre Dame comes in right now. They are 8.5-point dogs after opening up at 9.5 points. 7:30 Eastern, ESPN Monday night, January 20th. Mercedes-Benz Stadium, Atlanta, Georgia. It all comes down to this. On paper, this is an unbelievable matchup. You got number 1 and number 2 scoring defenses. You got 2 top 10 scoring offenses. Typically in football, if you watch the best teams square up against each other, the elite teams, the great teams, whoever, anytime they play, there's one common theme. And it is really hard for elite teams to run the ball on each other.
Yep.
Because they're just so evenly matched. Yep. If you can do that, you're going to win this game 90% of the time.
Yep.
When these teams match up. So it's going to come down to who can run the ball, who can stop the run, which is the case in most games. So let's start with on the Ohio State side of the ball. When they have the ball on offense, Notre Dame's going to run a ton of man coverage. Yep. That's just who they are. That's what Al Golden does. I don't think you can go into this game. I don't think you can just change who you are for one game. They may sprinkle in some zone here and there, but they're going to put probably a safety over the top, whether it's Xavier Watts or a Don Schuler. They're going to put a safety over the top of Jeremiah Smith, and they're going to trust that their other guys, Leonard Moore and Christian Gray, can at least contain Emeka Egbuka and Carnell Tate.
Yeah, so for Notre Dame, so we're going to talk about some keys to the game for Notre Dame to be able to win this and what Ohio State needs to do. In this matchup here, I think that Notre Dame's biggest, really their only advantage in this game is their defensive front needs to win the battle against Ohio State's offensive line. That's first and foremost. Texas did that against Ohio State, and obviously Ohio State scored 28 points, but their defense scored one of those touchdowns. And then they had that one play with Travion Henderson. So Texas's defensive front did an incredible job of winning that battle against the Buckeyes. Notre Dame has to do that. If they don't do that, they're not winning this game. And then the other one is Ohio State has the best collection of overall weapons in the entire country, and it's really not even close. Between both those tailbacks and between all those receivers and G. Scott at tight end, they've got weapons all over the place. And you can even use Will Howard. I mean, he's been efficient as he can possibly be. He's played really well. Throughout the whole year, he's been efficient and played well, but he's really stepped up his game a lot, and they put more on him in this playoff so far. But even him in the run game, he's a threat as well, especially on third downs and short yardage situations. He can make some plays and help move the sticks. But I think that maybe one of the biggest matchups in this game could be what you just talked about. Notre Dame's secondary has been nasty all year long. They've been elite in the secondary all year. This will obviously be their toughest test with this group of receivers in this bunch for the Buckeyes. Who wins that battle? If the Buckeyes dominate that battle, you were talking about the run game a minute ago. If the Buckeyes dominate that battle with the Ohio State wide receivers versus the Notre Dame secondary, they're going to win this matchup because that means that's going to open up. Notre Dame's going to expose themselves to the explosive play if that happens. And if you've seen anything in this college football playoff, Ohio State's offense has killed people in the explosive plays. Tennessee, Oregon, and Texas. You had the 90-something yard fumble recovery for the defense that Ohio State had. You had the Travion Henderson screen pass that he took 1 billion yards. We don't even need to go into the Jeremiah Smith stuff that he did in those first 2 games against Tennessee and Oregon. That's where Notre Dame's defense, they have to limit the explosive play. You have to, the bend don't break. Can you hold Ohio State to field goals instead of giving up 6? Can you hold them in the red zone? But they've got to win the line of scrimmage matchup, and they've got to be able to hold their own in the secondary against that Buckeye receiver bunch to be able to have a chance here.
Yeah, I think if they stick with their man coverage, it just depends on how much time Will Howard has to throw the ball. Because another thing that Notre Dame is going to do is they're going to blitz a lot. They blitz more than any other team in the country.
Yeah,
Again, that's what Al Golden does.
at one point they were like 45% of their
Yeah,
snaps. I think it was going into the Penn State game, like 45% of their snaps on defense they blitz.
yeah. And what Penn State did in that game, they countered with some screens.
Yep.
And Al Golden, he didn't care. He's just like, I'm going to keep bringing the blitzes. I don't care. Like eventually, and Kotelnicki got cute, so that's on him. But they're going to hope that they put enough pressure on Will Howard that he's forced into some mistakes. And they want to hope that Ohio State cannot sustain 12 to 14 play drives. They'll have a negative play here or there, or they'll have a penalty that'll put them behind the chains like they did against Texas.
Yep. And Chip Kelly on offense, like he's one of the best of showing you one thing and going the other direction with it, running the counter type plays. There was some film being shared on Twitter, like it was saying, could you imagine being a defense trying to have to deal with this, like reading your keys, like when you're a linebacker, you're reading the guards, and the guard will take you where the play is going to go. Well, obviously Chip Kelly knows that. That's what linebackers read. There were multiple plays in that game against Texas where the right guard and the right tackle were pulling going one way, and the left guard and the left tackle were coming the opposite direction. Like they were literally crisscrossing, like on some of their like pulling in their block. So
because they had a slot receiver in motion, and you're faking the end around, and then you're giving it to Henderson going left. Yeah,
it's good luck trying to deal with that. That's also why, I mean, again, they've got all these great athletes for Ohio State, but they've also got Chip Kelly and Ryan Day, the brain power together, that are calling plays. So yeah, that's tough, man. But what do you think as far as Notre Dame? Like, do you think that they'll have? Like, I agree with you that they're going to play man. They're going to be who they are. They're going to do what they do what got them here. But it's like Mariano Rivera that had that nasty cutter in baseball. It's all he threw. That's the only pitch he threw. But at some point, you do have to have something that you bring out. So like Notre Dame, they're the closer that's throwing 102 mile an hour, but eventually you got to throw a little bit of a curveball. Do you think they do come out and maybe match up differently on defense, maybe throw a little zone out there or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think they've got to surprise them. They've got to show them a look that hasn't been on film all season long. They've got on offense and defense, but they've got to show them something that really gets them thinking a little bit. And again, when you bring the pressure too, and he's already thinking about, well, I haven't seen this look. I mean, he knows what it is as a seasoned quarterback, but they haven't ran this before. What are they going to do when the ball is snapped? He's already thinking about that, and the pressure gets in his face. That's where you can have some advantages. But again, when Ohio State has the ball, like on their offensive side, if you're thinking that Notre Dame's going to do a bunch of man, and Emeka Egbuka is extremely talented. Like he shouldn't be able to be covered one-on-one in college. Like I know Christian Gray and Leonard Moore have been really good, but Ohio State needs to expose that on the Notre Dame defense, or this coaching staff. If they lose this game because of something like that, that coaching staff's going to be questioned big time in the offseason.
No, absolutely. And again, I'll go back to what I said earlier in this breakdown. Like that matchup, the Ohio State wide receivers versus the Notre Dame DBs. Like usually the game is always won at the line of scrimmage. And obviously these two teams have been as dominant as you could possibly be on the line of scrimmage overall in this entire playoff. But that matchup, because I just think both of these teams are going to be able to stop the run. That's just, these two defensive fronts are too talented. The coaching staffs are too good. And I think they're going to be able to stop the run. So who's going to win that matchup between the Buckeye receivers and the Notre Dame DBs? If it's lopsided, I think that's going to decide who wins this game. And to your point, dude, the Buckeyes have two receivers. I know Carnell Tate and some of those other guys are really good too. They're really good. But Egbuka and Smith both could be playing on Saturday and Sunday this weekend in the NFL playoffs.
Yeah.
Like, that's how good they are. And I know the Notre Dame DBs are legit. But, again, dude, this will, by far and away, it's not even close to the best receivers that they've faced all year. They haven't faced anybody that even could carry their freaking jocks all year long at the receiver position.
Yeah. Well, you talked about the run. Let's get back to where we started. We talked about it's going to, who can run the ball, who can stop the run. Ohio State offensive line, you talked about it. It's probably the weakest part of their entire team right now, but it's still very solid.
Yeah.
Still a really good offensive line.
Yep.
Can Henderson and Judkins, we've gone this long in this preview, not talking about Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins, can they be contained? You think they can? Can Notre Dame stop the run? Because they definitely struggled in that game against Penn State to stop the run with Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. And there were times even in the second half, Penn State could have ran on them, and Kotelnicki decided not to.
Yeah, I don't know if that was more of Penn State's. To me, it was more Penn State's offensive line was just whipping Notre Dame's defensive front's ass in that first half. And Allen and Singleton obviously they're extremely talented and one of the best duos, one of the two or three best duos in all of college football at the running back position. So they had a lot to do with it as well. But again, like Texas, I know they've got dudes up front, but they pretty much shut down that Ohio State run game overall. Judkins is more of that power, obviously, type back as opposed to Henderson's got some juice too in the power run game. But Notre Dame just has to limit the explosive runs. Because the problem with the Buckeyes is with both of these cats, especially Henderson, they may get 2 yards, 2 yards, 3 yards, 2 yards, and you're just like, the announcers are sitting there talking about, wow, Notre Dame's shutting down the run. And then the next thing you know, Henderson goes around the edge or off tackle for 45. And all the stuff that you've done in the run game is thrown out the window because he's hitting explosive plays in the run game.
That's what happened last year when these two teams played. They contained the run pretty well, and Henderson busted a 50-yard run or so.
Yep, exactly. You brought up a good point. I mean, these two teams played, what was that, 15 months ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, I know that there's a lot of different players on the Buckeye bunch for sure, and Notre Dame too.
Well, there's really not. I mean, all these defensive players from Ohio State came back, and they lost Marvin Harrison Jr., but they got Jeremiah Smith. I mean, other than Kyle McCord and Will Howard, it's roughly the same team.
It is, but, I mean, Jeremiah Smith.
And they added Caleb Downs. Let's not forget
Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs and Jeremiah Smith that's arguably two of the best players that are going to be on the field in this matchup. But, yeah, I mean, they've got to Notre Dame has to limit the explosive play in general. Like, they've got to do what Texas did to Ohio State. Make them go the length of the field. Make them be patient. Make them try to earn it all the way down the field and then hold up in the red zone when they get in the red zone. They can't give up the freaking explosive play. Think about it. Texas did a masterful job of slowing down Ohio State. And I know Ohio State fans have already been telling us this on our little early look. Yes, I'm fully aware that Ohio State had a lot of back-breaking, drive-killing penalties in that game. But that's the point. If you make them run more plays and work at it to get down the field, that obviously gives you more of an opportunity where things like that can happen, where your offensive line is holding, where somebody does make a block in the back, where you do get an illegal hands to the face, and so on. If you're just sitting there giving up 50-yard bombs to Jeremiah Smith, or you're giving up a 3-yard pass where he takes it another 50 yards like he did against Oregon early in that game, or Henderson on a screen pass goes 75, 80-plus yards, like that kills you. Yeah. That literally it's impossible to win football games when your defense is giving up just explosive plays one after another, which is what Tennessee and Oregon did against Ohio State. Texas was able to slow them down and able to do it, but still Ohio State scored 28 points because of the two huge plays that they had, one on defense and the screen pass. Yeah. So Notre Dame defense got to obviously be able to stop the run, and they've got to really hold their own in the DB versus receiver matchup and limit the explosive play. That's the keys for Notre Dame on defense.
Let's flip to the other side. When Notre Dame has the ball, just as it was for Texas, Oregon in the second game, Tennessee, everybody this year, it's going to be extremely tough for Notre Dame to score on this Ohio State defense. Mm-hmm. They are going to have to be flawless. They're not going to have they can't have any turnovers, very few penalties, which has plagued them a lot in the playoffs, especially in that Georgia game. You talked about running the ball. Notre Dame's only averaged 4 yards per carry in the playoffs on the ground, and I know that can be attributed to some injuries on the offensive line and, kind of a step up in competition, obviously, from who they played in the regular season. I mean, obviously competition gets tougher in the playoffs, but can the O-line get any push at all? I think they're going to have to try to get off tackle a little bit, but they better have somebody ready for that second level of that defense because Cody Simon and Sonny Styles are going to be waiting, and not to mention Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs just coming downhill to try to punish those running backs.
I don't know that I've ever seen Seriously, I'm not trying to be prisoner of the moment. I don't know that I've ever seen, when you watch a game, you see a pair of safeties that just absolutely flash into the screen and pop somebody at the line of, really at the line of scrimmage or right when they cross the line of scrimmage. The way that Ransom and Downs just diagnose plays, and as smart as they are, obviously they're really good in coverage too, but dude, they're ridiculous in the run game.
It definitely shows to the fact that I would think those guys, and really a lot of players, but those two guys specifically, I think they study film a ton. I mean, Caleb Downs talked about that toss sweep that Texas ran, and he said that Georgia tried to do that same thing to Alabama last year in the SEC championship game, and that's how he diagnosed it, and that's how he knew it was coming, and that's how he attacked it so fiercely.
Yeah, he literally he told Andy Staples in On 3 that but right before the play, he knew exactly what they were about to do. And it showed, obviously, on that toss sweep. Yeah, it's a good call there, man. So I talked about after the Tennessee game, after Ohio State blasted Tennessee and Columbus, we going into that Oregon game, I talked about that, the offensive explosion that they had against Tennessee, that might not be able to be replicated. Well, of course, they ended up doing it again to Oregon. But what can be replicated is how good they're playing on defense, how dominant they were up front, especially the defensive line, how dominant they were at the line of scrimmage on defense. They replicated that against Oregon. After the Oregon game, talked about it again, going into the Texas game. What could be replicated? Said the defense could, not sure the offense could. Obviously, the defense was again. That they replicated it again. Dude, I've got some numbers here that are just insane. This Ohio State defense here in the playoffs. So just some numbers here. They've had 28 tackles for a loss and 16 sacks in 3 college football playoff games so far. So what's interesting about that is the Buckeyes had 2.9 sacks per game in the regular season. In the playoffs, they're averaging 5.3 sacks per game. That's obviously huge. And really, JTT and Jack Sawyer have been just a dynamic duo there. Again, JTT had 5.5 sacks. He's had 5.5 sacks in the college football playoffs so far. He had 6 sacks the entire regular season. Jack Sawyer has 4.5 sacks in this playoffs. He had 4.5 sacks the entire regular season. See a theme here? So they averaged about 8.5. They averaged about 8 tackles for a loss in the regular season, and they're averaging around 10 tackles for a loss so far in this playoff. So the theme here is JTT and Jack Sawyer and that defensive line is wreaking havoc behind the line of scrimmage. They're killing teams with getting you behind the chains and getting you in second and long. And this defense is too good on the back end and too good up front for you to play behind the chains. I mean, no offense is going to be really successful playing behind the chains, but Notre Dame especially, the way that they play, dude, they can't play behind the chain. They just can't. They can't be sitting there. Like in the first half against Penn State, that seemed like what Notre Dame was doing almost every drive. They were giving up tackles for a loss, a sack, something where they were playing behind the chains. They have to win that battle, or at least hold their own. I'm not sure you can win that battle against this Buckeye defensive front, but you've got to be able to hold your own against it. It can't be Buckeyes have 8+ tackles for a loss and 4+ sacks in this game. That can't happen for Notre Dame to have success on offense. And more importantly, I went back and looked. So obviously the Buckeyes have looked pretty much unstoppable in this playoff. They've had 2 losses this year, Oregon and Michigan. I tried to look and see what was a parallel between those 2 games, because obviously Oregon plays a completely different style of football than Michigan does. There was one theme in that game, in both of those games, in both of those losses, and it has to do with what I was just talking about in regards to tackles for a loss and sacks. Ohio State in their 2 losses to Oregon and Michigan, they had a combined 0 sacks in those 2 games, and they only had 2.5 tackles for a loss combined in those 2 games. Again, they've had 28 tackles for a loss and 16 sacks in these 3 college football playoff games. So, if you're looking for a recipe to possibly get a win against this Buckeye bunch that looks borderline unstoppable right now, you've got to be able to prevent them from getting in the backfield and wreaking havoc in the backfield and getting tackles for losses and tackles for a loss and sacks. But easier said than done against this bunch.
Yeah, I mean, on Notre Dame's side, it's no secret that their passing game is not the strongest. Last game against Penn State, was the first game all season that Notre Dame had a 100-yard receiver. So the Ohio State defense we've seen it be susceptible to some deep shots, especially in that first Oregon game.
Yeah.
Notre Dame's going to have to take them without a doubt. They did that in the second half of the Penn State game. They took some, sluggos, some wheel routes, all that stuff. They've got to do that. They have to test Igbinosun on one side because he's similar to Christian Gray on Notre Dame's defensive backfield. He tends to get a little handsy. He's got a lot of penalties called on him this year.
Pretty physical.
A lot of pass interference. So you've got to test that defense as much as you can. You're not always going to succeed, like you just said. You're not always going to win those battles, but they have to know and they have to respect that a deep shot is at least coming. And if and when you get into the red zone, when you're Notre Dame, don't call it toss sweeps. That's just, and I know it's easier said than done to try to score on the number one red zone scoring defense in the country, which is Ohio State. But I know Notre Dame's not going to do that. Everybody knows what they're going to do. And for 3, probably 4 plays, they're going to run Riley Leonard right up the gut 4 times, and they're going to try to punch it in.
Yep.
That's just what they're going to do if and when they get down to the red zone. So,
something else I'm wondering what you think here. The Buckeyes look like that they had never, ever seen somebody throw the ball to the back out of the backfield against Texas. Like, Texas could not, just like in the Oregon game, Oregon for the majority of that game, it seemed like that there was not a single wide receiver that could freaking get open. Texas at one point in that second half, it's like, is there a wide receiver ever going to catch a pass for Texas in the second half? And then out of nowhere, like, the back out of the backfield was just open a lot. So, obviously, that's something that I'm sure that Jim Knowles and that bunch is going to be working on this week, because you got to imagine Notre Dame's going to attempt to do it. And if I'm not mistaken, didn't that first drive in the second half, Aeneas Williams?
Yeah, Aeneas Williams. I think he had 4 or 5 catches in the game, but he had that sluggo route.
He's a freshman, isn't he?
Yeah, true freshman. So, it's going to be an interesting matchup on that side of the ball. Overall, as a whole, man, 2 of the best cultures in college football.
Yeah.
What Marcus Freeman has created in just 3 years, I think, in my opinion, it's set Notre Dame up for success for as long as he is the head coach there. And I've said this on other shows. I believe they're one of the best position teams in the country with this new NIL and transfer portal era. They don't see a lot of guys transfer out because the guys that go to Notre Dame to play football, they also care a lot about the academics that Notre Dame provides, and you can't find that at other schools. Ohio State, Ryan Day has created this culture of toughness at Ohio State, and mostly mental toughness, in my opinion. He's tried to be tough really ever since that Notre Dame game last year where Lou Holtz called him out and he wasn't tough, right? But the mental toughness that this team has had to have to drown out the outside noise, especially after that Michigan game, even the noise from their own fan base, right? That Kirk Herbstreit's talked about, the lunatic fringe and all that, and just focus on the voices of that locker room. These 2 teams, they have some of the best cultures in college football.
Absolutely, man. And you think about it too. I know Ohio State fans listen to this. Like, the last thing they want anybody to do is bring up Michigan, but I think they would even admit, the last 2 to 3 years, Michigan kind of had a blueprint there of keeping guys in the program, being like a veteran group, having a good culture within the locker room between the players, like the players themselves. I'm not talking about the Connor Stallions crap and all that other stuff. I'm talking about just the players in the locker room, player-led team type stuff. That's what Michigan had, and they won a national championship last year, and they were built on toughness. Ohio State had a bunch of dudes that came back that could have went pro, and the culture between, and like you just talked about, in that locker room with those players themselves in general, like, they had to look themselves in the mirror, man, after that Michigan game and decide how they wanted to be remembered. And they did not want that game against Michigan being their lasting memory. Absolutely not. And the culture, the veteran group that they've got mixed in with a couple of obviously key transfers like Downs and like true freshman Jeremiah Smith. That's the blueprint, man. And you're right with Notre Dame, dude. Like, what's the guy that gave that passionate speech, the God, country, and mother effing Notre Dame before they played Georgia?
Pat Coogan.
Pat Coogan. Like, he talked about, like, this is our culture versus their culture. Like, that's what this game comes down to against Georgia in that game. And it's obvious that, like, culture is the number one. I'm going to say number one. It's the number one thing. I know everybody talks about it, man. But, like, talking about it and then going out and being about it and showing it to the rest of the country like Notre Dame has done and like Ohio State has done in this playoff, that's a completely different deal. You're onto something there, man, with Notre Dame in regards to, like, they're not going to be a team that's going to be portal heavy. And the types of dudes that they're going to continue to bring in, like a Riley Leonard, is going to be guys that have that certain type of mentality about them that fits the culture at Notre Dame. And, like, we've seen it, man, like in the day and time of college football where teams don't have tons of depth anymore because of the transfer portal. I mean, Notre Dame has had, I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of injuries that they've had. And I know the Buckeyes have had some key injuries on the offensive line, for sure. But Notre Dame's had injuries at every freaking position group throughout this entire year. It's unbelievable, especially in this playoff. And they continue to find ways to win. Why is that? Culture. That's why. And so in this game, that culture is going to have to show up in a big way because this is the most talented roster. I don't even think it's even a mouthful to say this at this point. I said it earlier a few weeks ago, and it may have seemed hot take-ish, but I don't think it does anymore. Ohio State has the most talented roster that we've seen as far as talent across the board in college football since the 2019 LSU team. That's what they're a different type of team than that 2019 LSU team. I'm just talking about pure talent across the board. At every position group on defense and the wide receivers that you've got for the Buckeyes and the two tailbacks. I mean, they're the most talented team by far. So Notre Dame's culture is going to have to win them this game.
Yeah. All right. It's prediction time for the national championship. It's time, man. You got to give a prediction. Who are you leaning with?
I've kind of gone back and forth on how I wanted to, as far as predict the game. Like, I mean, as far as the winner of this game, I'm going to pick Ohio State to win. I know I've picked against your Irish a couple of times. I think I've done it twice this year, and the Irish are 2-0 in the two
Good
times
luck.
that I've picked against them. But I do not think that this is going – I think it has a chance, obviously, as talented as the Buckeyes are. It has a chance to possibly get a little out of hand. I just think Notre Dame's culture, I think Marcus Freeman and Al Golden and Mike Denbrock, that coaching staff is one of the two best in the entire country. Really, these two teams, the coaching staffs as a whole, especially the coordinators and head coach, are the best trios in college football. And I think that Notre Dame's got enough about them that they're going to keep this one within striking distance. I think it's going to be a defensive slugfest at the line of scrimmage. And I think I'm going to say Ohio State wins this game. I'm going to say 24-13.
Okay. So Ohio State covers that 8.5 for you. Notre Dame is number 4 in turnover margin in the country, and they're going to need every bit of it.
Mm-hmm.
If Ohio State wins this game, they'll have beaten 6 of the other 11 teams that were in the playoffs, including AP number 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 9. That will be one of the most legendary runs in college football history right there.
Yep.
But I'm going with my heart over my head, man. Doing it for the pod. I think special teams is going to make a big difference in this game. Notre Dame has seemed to have the special teams edge, whether it be on punt coverage, whether it be on kickoff returns. Obviously, their field goal team has really stepped up this year in the playoffs. So I think that they get it done behind Mitch Jeter's leg once again. And I think they get a field goal with under a minute to go. And I think Notre Dame gets it done 24-23 to capture their first national championship since 1988. So we'll see.
If that happens, man, 24-23, like a one possession game like that where somebody wins at the end of the fourth quarter like that, these two brands and these two programs like that, this whole 12-team playoff would have been beyond worth it to give us a result like that in the national championship game.
Yes, sir. So that's it for us right now. We hope you enjoyed the preview. We'll be back very, very quickly right after the national championship game on Monday night to give you our instant reaction on the game. We hope it's a good one. We hope everyone tunes in. We hope everyone enjoys the game. We got 4 quarters of college football left until August, so enjoy it while you can. Like we said, subscribe, follow, all that good stuff. Follow us on all social media, and we will see you next time.